Everybody. Look at this laughter here. It must be Christmas time, is it? No, it's just called local government. Yeah, okay, rightio. You wait till I get financial benchmarks on you guys. That's a joke. That's a joke. I just wonder if I can just get a wee nod from the back. We're live streaming. Are we ready to go? Brilliant. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to our meeting of the 17th December. It's the last meeting for me, not for me. Actually, no, it's not my last audit committee. I got one on Friday, sorry. My last committee, certainly our last one here in Timaru before Christmas. So, as I was just saying informally to Stephen before I came into we started in Andrea, look, thank you for, again, the quality of the paper's a good set to make for a good meeting. I don't know what our appetite is for length of meeting today, but we'll just try and chip through reasonably fast. But there is good stuff in every paper, so let's also take the relevant time that's necessary. So we'll see how we go. So welcome. It's good to have you here. So perhaps we could start with the apologies. I have one from Janice, my fellow independent. Janice couldn't make it. She's actually sent me a whole bunch of notes, which fortunately also tie in pretty closely with mine. So I won't pass those around, but I just want to acknowledge that Janice has helped, in effect, me also prepare for the meeting. She's gone through the minutes, and I have actually, as I said, her comments with me as well. So I've got Janice. Anybody up? Nigel, for a wee bit of lateness. He said he's got an alarm going off at work or something, so he had to just shoot through. I'm sure he'll be back. Is there anybody else? We can all be here for the meeting? Sorry, and Peter, you're right. Peter, did you say Peter, Michelle? Yeah, Peter has had to apologise. Something has come up about his big tennis tournament, which I said probably for the sake of the town, as in relative to the audit committee, sounds like it should have a higher precedence. So he's meeting with his tennis bosses and ITF, whatever they call themselves, it's International Tennis Federation or something. So he's just doing his work there. So actually, we don't need to sustain the lateness for Nigel. So for Janice and for Peter, thank you, Scotty. You'll put that. I'll second that. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. I haven't been informed of any urgent business, folk. There's nothing we need to add. We're pretty informal. We can always add as we go on. Similarly with matters of a minor nature. In terms of the stuff that's coming up, the papers, any matters of your interest that you need to acknowledge or note at this stage? We're good? I'd be surprised if there was. Look at the minutes of the 9th of September. You okay, Stacey? Oh. Sorry. There we are. Is it a chocolate fisheye, everybody? Are you okay, Michelle? Is there Stacey? You okay?
I was just wondering if Stacey had a conflict with the item around the commission payment.
What was that, sorry?
To remove myself from the table at that time.
Great. Look, thank you for that, Stacey. My name's also mentioned in that in terms of some action. That action is still happening, so I don't think you need to get out for it, to be honest, Stacey, but I can let you know where I'm at as far as the management response to that which involves me, so no big drama at this stage. Right, so anyway, we have the minutes, please, of, yes, it is the 9th of September. I'll move from the chair. We take them as a true and correct record. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Michelle. Is there any discussion, accuracy, completeness? We okay? They're very fulsome, so well done. And there's a lot in there. There were only one or two matters that I just noted in there that that looked like they were actually probably comments from me which were requests for follow-up. They've either been dealt with, one was with Rudy, the auditor, and the other relates to a finalised audit management report, and we've got that on the paper, so I'm comfortable that actually those are fine. So, sorry, did I have a second? I said I'd moved. Did I have a seconder? Oh, Michelle, thank you. No other questions or comments? Pardon? Very good reporting. Yeah, okay. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you. Right. Sam. We've got Sam here? No. Are you talking? Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. We've probably changed the agenda up a wee bit, so Sam's probably used to only being here later in the meeting. Yes, I do. Oh, sorry, I should have noted that. Yeah, no, I'm aware of that, sorry, and I said that. Okay. While we're waiting on Sam, sorry, I should have mentioned this in terms of the agenda order. We're going to deal with item 6.7, and I take it Rudy and Jenna are coming in by way of Zoom. We'll deal with the management report. We'll then go into public excluded, and we will deal with item 10.6, which is our time with the auditor. So what I'll do is I'll, in effect, probably just adjourn the meeting, let you guys have a break, and we'll have 5 minutes with the auditor, and then we will reconvene and continue with our agenda. G'day, Sam, how are you? Nice to see you again. I was just saying, we're just testing staff. We've just changed the order around a wee bit, and you're not normally on till about halfway through the morning, so you're top of the billing. In your hands, please.
Okay, thank you. Kia ora, everyone. Flowingly is a process management tool used to automate, manage, and optimize workflows. It includes tools for tracking processes, a risk module for managing risks, and an online library hosting council processes for shared access and collaboration. Processes and risks from ProMap have been transferred, and training is currently in progress. A review of both unpublished and published processes are underway with the goal of converting unpublished processes into published. The ESCA Procure to Pay is an automated solution aimed at streamlining procurement by ensuring purchase orders are purchase requests are authorised and invoices are matched with corresponding purchase orders. There are ongoing system enhancements to improve customer experience, and this is expected to be completed by February 2005. These enhancements include updates to reporting and changes to the requisition to improve the overall user experience. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate that. Folk, do you have questions for Sam at all on terms of these? These are really important little, wrong word, isn't it? These are important aspects of ongoing effective administration. So, folk, do you have questions? Yes, Michelle.
I just have one, it might be more for Andrea, but the Magic, or Magic, however you say that, is that going to solve the ongoing issues we have around the high-level reporting, or is it just aimed at solving the issues around that original data and information?
There is the intention, so we will be using Magic for the forecast. We will also be using Magic for the annual plan process. The intention is that we develop it so that we can get reports from there as well. So it doesn't sort the underlying issues around GL structure and that kind of thing, but hopefully we'll be able to use it for reporting.
And so, sorry, just a follow-on question if I may, Mr Chair. So the underlying issues around the GL structure and that, so do we have a plan to sort that, or is it just in the too hard basket?
We don't have a permanent plan at this point in time. When Justin gets back from his conference overseas, then early next year, him and I will sit down and discuss how we're going to plan some kind of change going forward. Yeah.
Justin's of the view that authority is capable of being used a lot better, just that we're so far behind on our versions. He wants us to take us to the cloud version, which is used. It's used internationally, but as part of that move to the cloud version, we will have to look at our GL structure. So that'll turn into a bit of a project.
Michelle, thank you for the raising that. I wonder, we'll come back to the program, I wonder if we could have a bit of a briefing around this at our March meeting, our next meeting anyway, Andrea. You've tapped into something which I've always sensed has been here, which is actually that there are some challenges around effective use. And you're quite right, Nigel, authority is well used elsewhere around the country at various stages of versions and development. I could name a number of local authorities we could talk to who are sometimes it's the active tense, and have also dealt with either structure and or how to report. And I think if this is something that we can get some focus on, I think as a committee it would be good for us to help, encourage. So I wonder, would next March be an appropriate time to bring back at least your formative thinking around a project on that one, Andrea?
Yes, it will be.
Could you do that? And if Justin's here, well, obviously Justin's back, it'd be good to hear from him if there's any technical issues or not. But as I say, thank you, Michelle. I've always understood this to be a bit of an underlying challenge. Let's try and bring it out in the open, so to speak, and work together to get it fixed. Thank you for that. Thanks, Michelle. Any other questions for Sam? Yeah, Scotty.
More a general comment, really, that I actually enjoy reading these reports on these processes that will improve the way we do business. But for me, one of the things I'm looking for, rather than the in progress and where we're at sort of thing, are some dates. When do we expect to be closing out certain projects and the likes? That would just be useful for me. Thanks.
Right, I'll incorporate that into the next meeting.
We've tried to keep it. We've sort of got varied, haven't we, here a wee bit? Because we might recall we had lots of individual reports, and we said strategically that it needed to be too that detailed, and we've cut it back a bit. I would agree with the dates, because I'm going to ask Sam a question about dates, but I think, Michelle, you might have one before me.
I just have one question about the table on page 25. Do the colours mean something, or I couldn't quite make sense of that table? Because normally in my mind green means we're all complete, but we've got some projects that are in progress that have got green all the way along, and then we've got one random yellow box in there.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the green does mean we're all tracking nicely and in progress. Yes, with Magic we have got the kind of amber block under the schedule, but the rest of it seems to be tracking along, and we're definitely making some more progress on Magic.
Sam, my question, and you've tackled it already, was flowingly, but it also lines up with Scotty's question about timing. There are a number of times flowingly, it's a terrible word, isn't it? Sorry, it's probably a good name, but it doesn't trip off the tongue that well. Is a response in many places to questions, particularly around Narian's, your work, internal audit, our continuous improvement. We're waiting on Flyingly will deliver, yada, 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 yada. So there's clearly quite a change from existing practice, particularly under ProMap, into Flyingly, but then there's also the work around risk assessment, etc., going on. So firstly, a couple of questions. One, clearly this is an internal project. We have a proper project management process around this, correct? And secondly, again, to go back to your point, Scott, when do we catch up on ProMap and the work we've done to date so that we can then get actually into making the use of it? Who can tell me that answer? Who can tell me that answer? Well, the question was twofold. Do we have full proper project control around Flyingly, Nigel, number one, so that we've got a defined project which finishes at a certain date? And secondly, what is that date? And the reason, or the context I asked that question, is that when I start reading the status updates on a good number of our internal audit and indeed some of the other papers, open recommendations. It all comes back to, in effect, we're waiting on flowingly. So I'm just interested, it's pivotal to many things, so I'm interested to know, A, we've got good control, and B, we have a sense when we've caught up to date, seeing we're moving.
Awesome. So yes, all processes have been transferred into Flowingly, and we have identified champions, and we're meeting with those champions on a regular basis just to see where we're at with the unpublished versions. I got a number from Flowingly yesterday as to how many processes we have so far in the system, and it's looking close to the 600 mark. And I think in ProMap there was around 479. So our champions are busy putting processes into the system, and we're reviewing that. I do feel that in terms of the project, we are making progress with it. It's a little easier tool to use for the different users in the organisation. And as for a date, we were thinking March, we would definitely be live with it, and the training would have been done, and working with getting those processes, more processes mapped out.
Yeah, okay, look, that's cool. So by sort of, when we have our June meeting, we, to be honest, quite frankly, we should be starting to see some of the outstanding improvement items being knocked off, because we have Flowingly as a product in hand. I appreciate we're going to carry on using it. We are using it, and it should be making a beneficial impact on.
That's correct. Yeah.
Stephen.
And through the chair, we're also taking the training as an opportunity for everyone to actually train through doing by going in and actually reviewing the system.
Yeah.
So it should get quite a big refresh through that process as well, because we've sort of dragged them over as is, but then it's a good chance to go through and actually do as well.
You know, it might be worth us having a half-hour workshop in the new year, because it's so pivotal to the work of the committee. It might be quite useful, Sam, if we can throw up on a screen, you know, a typical system, what does Flowingly look like relative to it, and how does it affect, so we can better understand. Groovy.
And I mean, a lot of that for us would be what sort of dashboard reporting we can pull out of it, and also what audit and risk actually wants, because we want to present you with what you want. So,
well, that's a good second point. I think that would go well with that sort of, you know, the sense of, if we took half an hour before we started a meeting, say next year, just to have a chance to see what it looks like, to then start to work out, well, actually, I can see how either we're just agreeing this is a system which is supporting management, that's great, and or there may be some reporting that could come our way as a committee, which would be great. Groovy. I keep saying that today, showing my age, aren't I? Okay, recommendations is that we receive and note Sam's good report. Mover and a seconder. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Scotty. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. I've got into delegation of who's voting here, Scotty, so you better stay awake. I've got Nigel here as well. Stacey, are you a formal part of my committee? I always reckon we should make you a good regular attender. Can we appoint a Nigel? Oh no, I appreciate you being here, Stacey. I just like to, if you're going to be here, give you the credit of being a full member and have a vote. And you're welcome to have a say. Can we, Elliot? G'day, Elliot. Can we have a good look at your legal compliance report? Thanks.
Yeah, good morning. So agenda item 6.2, this is a follow-up report to the 9th of September report to this committee around the annual report process for providing legislative compliance. It was originally intended to accompany the annual report process. Compliance has been obtained from the officers, and that's set out in the annex in terms of the 9th of September paper. This has been provided to the CE, who's then used that assurance to complete the annual report process. The recommendations are to receive report or not. There's three comments I'll make in respect to the report. Firstly, the Water Services Act, which is noted at paragraph 5, the recommendation there in respect of this non-material non-compliance was for the delegation manual update to remedy this. That has been folded into the water reform process due to the moving feast. We had amendments to the Water Services Act last week, and so that's how that is being addressed. RMA monitoring, we have a new resource, a RMA bylaw monitoring officer who's been hired and is intended to warranted before Christmas to bolster the council's monitoring function there. And then finally, I note that one of the comments that the Audit and Risk Committee were concerned around with this process for legislative compliance was ensuring that it was fulsome and covered the legislative scheme. I've conducted quite an extensive review, and I've got 17 possible acts for inclusion in the delegation manual review, so just providing that sort of personal assurance to that issue that you did identify. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Elliot. Appreciate that. Folk, your questions, comments for Elliot? Yes, Scotty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not at all that suggesting that we don't trust the officers, but do we test the assurances? How are they tested? How are they delivered in terms of an assurance? I'm just not clear how that happens.
Yeah, it depends on the risk of the function, and for instance, the ones obviously. The more significant ones, and touching on the SEV, provided specific advice around each of those exercises. And I guess I'd note, just in respect of like the last item there on the list, item 60, that's a Public Works Act certification process, and I've been monitoring that assurance, and I received that yesterday from our agents that process has gone through. So it is quite bespoke to the individual powers and functions. Yeah.
Thank you.
I would presume, Elliot, in some sense, you're partly our control, because you're overseeing the system, you're talking with people, and presumably throughout the year, with your in-house legal counsel role,
yes,
you are seeing evidence of staff working effectively in meeting the requirements of the Act. Now, that won't necessarily be complete, but I mean, I'm looking here for how, in a normal position, we think, Scotty, in terms of legislative risk, what's our assurance, which is your point. What's the assurance that actually we see something here, we're saying it's compliant? How do we see behind that? And I'm assuming, Elliot, that you're my, brought up, unless we set Nary and loose on a particular piece, and I would presume, Narian, when you do work from an internal audit perspective, you'd have regard for the legislative context. It's a question of how do we build that confidence. I think that'd be the way I'd see it. Elliot, you may have a comment on that.
I guess I'd say, it is people in the building with functions. I respond to risk as it arises. The process improvements is something I'm always identifying. Essentially, the delegation manual has a number of improvements I want to develop with the delegation manual, but sitting underneath that is a need for a clear line of sight to the processes for each of those, and that's the evolution that I want to see, is essentially the delegation manual having that line of sight where the assurance can keep going deeper, and that's, I think, one of the things that we discussed in September is that the evolution of legislative compliance is a journey that we're on, and I'm comfortable that we're shepherding that through.
Brilliant. So there is actually a strong sense here where, and actually it goes back to an item we've got in PX around recruitment and retention, Scotty, we are employing people with relevant competence. That must be one of the areas we would look at in terms of employing a person. So it is to some extent a person certifying I've done my job. I've looked after legislative compliance, and the question is, and Elliot's starting to give me a sense, and I've got Narian over here, that we actually have some insight that people do fulfil their obligations appropriately, but there is that sense of relevant people must have and should have regard for what the statutory obligations are of performing the role that they're in. So, in one sense, I take on board the fact that we've got a compliance a statement from people in that first sense. Any other questions? Just in that regard, and I want to stress this. I want to just raise a question about a position. And I want to stress that I'm not actually having any problem with a particular person who I don't know. I noticed a number of these are signed off by the EA. What is that the EA for infrastructure? not who, is that a role called an executive assistant, or is this a different?
Yeah, could you just give me a quick reference? And I'll
Yeah,
make sure.
if you look at, say, the Burial and Cremation Act on page 31, number 8, the EA infrastructure provided the assurance, not the general manager.
Yep, no, fair enough. No,
Do these people have, is this the person with responsibility for the Burials and Cremation Act?
yeah, so the GM, the column with the GM infrastructure is the assurance from the GM infrastructure, which is what we need to know. The officer record is the record of compliance being provided by the coalface officer, and that was collected by the EA, and that is just how I've referred to it, that the EA is actually engaged with that officer and has set out the statutory function, and that is the way that I managed the extent of functions that needed to be interrogated, and then I came in on the high-risk ones, or the ones with issues and so forth. So it's really more of a reference to how the originating evidence is captured, and then that evidence has been through a process, an assurance process, with the GM ultimately signing off on that. So yeah, it's.
So in all cases, it's the GM
record.
in effect that's signing,
Yes,
but
yes.
you're saying you
Yes,
sourced
and-
your information through the EA.
And they're ultimately the responsible officer for that power.
Okay, brilliant, thank you, that's good. Rightio, oh, that's useful. I think in going forward again with the program, Elliot, I would be keen if we just tried to think this one through relative to the obligations to have a letter of representation signed under the annual report. So I don't need to try, it's great to have this, so, you know, and I appreciate this has been a work on from your perspective, but in or around October, we're going to be recommending, well, of course it's going to be different this coming year, I suppose. Well, it won't be actually, technically, but unless we decide to go for a September sign-off, Andrea, but we'll talk about that later on. It would be good to have this annual reporting aligned with that. Now, I don't know what it would take to do that. Elliot, you might say, forget it, Bruce, but I just raised that as a planning and integration point. The key annual set piece is Nigel and Nigel signing a letter of representation, which includes we have complied with the law, which is when you would love to see, you know, the current update from staff in terms of that.
That's a really useful observation. The delegation manual is a key governance tool, and you know, there's only 3 things we can do: govern, training, and tools. And to date, I have been sort of identifying a completion date for a delegation review to line up with the inaugural meeting in October. I guess that would be in October. And so, just thinking out loud. Sorry, I don't have the calendar in front of me. It's the annual report sign-off that'll be prior to that inaugural meeting, and so that suggests to me that actually that I need to break those 2 up, because my view is that the delegation manual needs to have the council delegations, because there's a number of them scattered through it, removed, so that the delegation manual is a pure CE document with all of the delegations that are being exercised or given by the council in a different document. So I need to change the delivery date for that next part. And so it's a bit of thinking out loud, but essentially I'm envisaging that we'd need to bring in the delegation manual delivery date prior to that in time to enable that September sign-off. So that's
so if we just, could I just ask you to think on that one and come back with it? So have a look at the letter. I mean, put it this way, I'd start with a letter of representation. What is it the 2 Nigels, and actually, because the committee recommends that the 2 Nigels sign the letter, what is the obligation? How broad is that coverage? How does this fit with your legislative compliance program? That's what I just ask in terms of integration and timing, and we'll be open to a discussion as to what's effective. This is great to have this, by the way, because, you know, we moved away from comply with, and it's starting to see the fruits of your labour. So I'm very happy that we've got this here. No complaint. Of course, I'm just being greedy. I want to now make certain we've got aligned with probably as I say, the set piece annually we have to do, which is as an organisation, assert legislative compliance to the Auditor General. And that's more than just the annual report. That's, we have complied with the law, blanket. So that's why I raise this as an issue. We can look at that later on. Can we move to oh yes, Michelle.
Sorry, just one question that I just noticed. On page 34, under the Lagoima at point 33, it says there were 5 ombudsman complaints responded to. So is this something we have or should have visibility over? And what does responded to mean? Does that mean they then went away, or are they ongoing, or how were they resolved?
Yeah, good question. I'm trying to see the law in the back of my eyeballs, but essentially, I think officers are obliged to implement the Ombudsman's recommendation unless we come and get a resolution from council. So that's kind of how the law structures the governance oversight for that. And so what you're seeing there is the assurance that each of those Ombudsman's recommendations have been implemented. I recall that typically these Ombudsman's sort of complaints or investigations end up on your actions register in any event, but it is incumbent upon the officers as the delegated, as the officer with the delegated responsibility to decide, I think it's about 20 working days, whether or not they're going to implement it or come to council for a resolution as to why they're not going to. So.
That makes sense, but probably a question for the chairman. Is that something we should have visibility over? Because I don't, unless I've forgotten, I don't really recall anything through this committee about ombudsman complaints.
Mm.
I can recall one in particular involving the temporary traffic management, and the GM infrastructure did an update, and then that was removed from the actions register. So that's an observation I've seen of how that works, whether or not that's a coded expectation or not.
Some of the Ombudsman's complaints are actually very low level.
But I kind of think if there's 5 and there's a recurring theme and we don't know about it,
No,
to me that's a bit of a risk.
Yeah, they're all different. I can, the one that comes to mind is the rates for the farm, where they're all in different, all the different titles are in different names, and that got resolved through the Ombudsman. It probably didn't need to go there, but the person named the complaint just wouldn't accept.
And I get that, and I guess I'm not worried about this in particular. I'm just worried about what is the process, and when does council need to know and when does council not need to know, or what is the process around reporting those complaints to council, I guess is my question.
Look, you've asked me what my experience is, and it's probably varied, Michelle. Again, without trying to create too many reports, I would be used to generally an annual return to the committee on the state of play under Lagoima. The number of Lagoimas we've had, the numbers that essentially at a high level that we've met within the 20 days, and again a high level summary of those which we might not have. In terms of any particular issue, so that's have we got a system to deal with Lagoimas? How have they gone? And are we okay, basically? Which is just that high level of assurance. We have the what do we call it? The active issues register, whatever it is, in PX. And my assumption would be, because I think I've seen it there before, I'm struggling to remember now. If there was something of significance, particularly in relationship to the Ombudsman, I would suspect it would be there. Now, I draw a distinction between Lagoima, which is really a matter of legislative compliance and really sits in, if I've got my legislation correct, in the hands of Nigel. I never know to say whether it's Nigel 1 or 2, but essentially Nigel CE. But if the Ombudsman was doing an investigation of any significance, I would expect the committee to know. So the last one we had, of course, was when he had a crack at us over, before you came, Nigel, over public meetings. And we were obviously talking about that here at this committee. So that sort of substance I would expect to come through probably the PX active issues register. But an annual return, if I can call it that, or an annual paper, just summarising the actions we've had to take under Lagoima and compliance, yada yada, isn't necessarily a bad thing. Let's look at that when we come to the program. You're putting my program up beautifully. Thank you, Michelle. Can we go to any other questions? Can we please, I mean, look, it goes without saying, nobody in local government needs to be told, look at all that legislation. I know those are only the ones that you would say were material, by the way, as well. So it reflects the substantial workload we have in terms of compliance. I'm going to move from the chair that we receive and endorse. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Scotty. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you. Hello, we're at the work program. What's the first one we put on it, Michelle? Look, thank you, Narayan. Is there any comment you'd like to make, or will I just open up for questions, Narayan?
Through you, Chair, the Audit and Risk Committee work program. This report has been split into the following areas: standing agenda items, other agenda items, and audit and assurance agenda items, and updated calendars for 2025 with any changes highlighted are included in this report. The Debenture Trust audit report will not be presented to this meeting as it is still being audited. The report will be presented at the March 2025 meeting.
Thank you, Narayan. Folk, do we have comments or questions? So this is your chance to add a wee bit of what we would like. Yes, Steve?
It's just a note, we got the debenture report in the day after the agenda's closed, so.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's good to know. Look, I think for good purposes, you need to put that on the agenda for the next meeting just so that we can formally receive it. But it's almost, I was about to say it's a pro forma, wrong word. You'd expect it to be done. So thank you for telling us. But if we could just add that to the agenda in March just so that we can formally receive and tick it off, that would be great. Any other comments, questions? Because I have a few. Sorry, Narayan. So look, this is really great, and thank you for giving us a sense of what we have done in 24 and where we want to go in 25. Just, I don't really have too much to change or to even say in terms of the agenda, but I just wonder if I could note a couple of things. So March 25, we have the insurance program update, which is quite right, because most of our insurances roll at what date here? Is it 1 June or are we 1 November? Okay. So look, it would be useful, and I want to come back to potentially the idea of a workshop, that we have an update from our brokers in terms of the insurance environment. Let's remember our insurance strategy is about who assumes the risk. Do we take the risk on, but don't, and if so, how do we take it? Alternatively, can we pass the risk off to somebody else, and what does it cost us? There is enough movement in this sector to suggest that perhaps we should look at how that is positioned for us. So I'd like to suggest, Stephen, that we think a wee bit, have we got our strategic approach to insurance correct? Correct me if I'm wrong, so who is our broker? Aon?
Yeah, Aon at the moment. Okay,
well, look, this is, and I'm not trying to provide business for them, but I think it would be useful for Aon to brief us over an insurance strategy.
So would you like a paper brought to the March?
Yeah, this is the March meeting, because we need to do it prior to the placement rather than after the placement is what I'm saying. So the second report in September clearly is just, hey, this is what we've been able to get for you. The market this year actually softened up right at the end, and we were able, generally rates were favourable, subject to the valuation of your asset base. And particularly through the Aon group, there were, the liability question, which was a real issue with one New Zealand player pulling out last year, was really important. And they're able to get that. But look, my bottom line is that we need to think: are we aware of our Category 1, Category 2 risks? Do we have a sense of what our maximum probable loss is, etc.? Those are the sorts of questions we should just occasionally have a look at from a strategic perspective, and logically we would do that at the strategy stage, Stephen, rather than at the post placement process. So I don't want to make it big, but I just think it would be worthwhile if we were to add that in there, please. The other thing that I just mentioned this to Narayan, because it's going to come up a wee bit later. With the internal audit program, he's given us a sense of the internal audit program coming forward. I actually would like to suggest that we should do this in relationship to the financial year, because actually it's about voting funds and resources to it as well. So while we've got a bit here, and we'll deal with that today, what I'd like to suggest, Narayan, is that in June, you bring us the rolling 3-year program that we want to have, that is recommended, and we look at that. And again, that program should be based around risk. What do we see as the big risks going forward? Is the internal audit program aligned with risk? Just standard stuff. And it would also be normal for a risk committee to just do the annual check of the internal audit charter, that we've got our settings right, that we're all okay and rocking forward. So so while it's going to be twice, because we're going to deal with it today, but we'll deal with it again in June 25, I would like that to be there. So a workshop, I think it says to be confirmed, but I think we should plan for one in June. And I think it's just, I'm sure we can do it pretty easily internally unless we really want to go to town, and I don't think we do, but it would be useful as a committee for us to look at our strategic risk. And what actually, have we got the right settings, where we're at, just doing that refresh relative to where we want to go. And I'd like to suggest out of that, that one of my little self-assessments would be that it might be quite useful, Nigel, if you'd let me after that to come and brief council on what the committee sees are the strategic risks, so that they're aware of what we're actually managing. So that would be okay. That probably has me on. Elliot, we talked about just thinking about the alignment of the legislative compliance, and I'll leave it in your hands. Scotty, you had a point?
Only with regard to the operational risk register, Mr. Chair, and probably your knowledge here. First glance, my note here was, is just once a year normal, and taking into account what we discussed earlier regarding the flowingly report system really being fully online in March, would there be value in that either later or again happening later in the year to see how that is working for us? My initial reaction is let's take that as a set piece, that yes, we do this in March. And I would say from there, Scotty, let's hold that lightly in the sense of if we have to schedule on more, let's do that. But let's see, there's a sense to which with Sam we're wanting to see where has it really got to and how's it influencing us. In terms of operational risk itself, we don't have the time to be worried about operational risk at every meeting, if I can be blunt. By their nature, they're ELTs to manage. But I do like the fact that we get a level of optics over the whole system once a year, so I'm comfortable, as in contrast to Flynley, which I'm keen to see is actually driving our system of risk management inside the organisation. Steve.
Very good, Mr. Chair. Oh, sorry.
I got Stephen first, then Nigel.
The way we were thinking of doing it is we'd present the full kit and caboodle once a year, and then any exceptions or major changes would get reported to each meeting just as a short form report.
Yeah, and I think that's a good phase at which we as a committee can say, well, actually, is the setting right? Why aren't we seeing that risk? Or, gee, that's great. Thanks. Good to know. Nigel?
I think you just covered it. I think it's good to keep the operational risk coming here, because it is. Management's got to keep abreast of that. But the strategic risk is important for this committee and the council. That's the one we should really be making sure.
We need to, if we have time, we've got to find the time. That's what we should be devoting our time to, Nigel. So I agree with you. Brilliant. Okay, that's good. I think we can make some small changes as we go forward. So I do think I mean, again, it would be normal. It's not necessarily dependent on the annual report, but we should consider things like the point you've raised, say perhaps in December next year, an update on the Goima, where that's got to. Stephen, I think we might as well put that in as a practice now rather than not. The other thing which does come out of here is, I suppose, Andrea, when are you planning to sign off the next year's annual report? You're meant to be smiling at this point, not grimacing.
We've yet had to have that discussion with the auditors.
Yeah. So, as I was saying, dare I say it, at my good friend Central Otago yesterday, ideally we'd have it signed off before the elections. But yes, you are entitled to grimace. I don't think that's particularly wise, mainly because you've got to get the water service delivery plan out of the way and need to focus on that. And I suspect your team are heavily involved. So you haven't got much leeway to take it later into October. But I think I would argue, and I would accept, that we probably need to take the time. The only issue is then you've got to ask a new council to sign off on the prior year's annual report, which is always a wee bit of and I'm not suggesting anything about election outcomes here, Nigel. All I'm trying to reflect. I don't think we've had that problem here. I mean, if we come to that, it just means that our September meeting, we do have quite a set piece around the draft annual report, so that we can at least leave a record for the new incoming council. I think we did this last time, which just gives some assurance to the incoming council that the outgoing arrangements have taken it as far as they can. This is the state of it, etc. There was ways around that. So I'm making an assumption you're going for an October sign-off, to be honest. But I'll let you and Nigel and team work through whether I'm being a wee bit preemptory on that. Okay, well, thank you for that, Narian. So, look, from the Chair, I'm going to move that we with those amendments, receive and note the work plan. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Nigel. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Thank you. Rightio, external auditors' open recommendations. This does tie in a wee bit with our external auditors, but I don't think we need to delay dealing with this until the guys get on board. So, Narian, I'm in your hands, please.
Through you, the Chair, the external auditors' open recommendations. There are 18 open recommendations from the external auditors. 11 is closed by Audit New Zealand and 4 is open to date, while 3 is in progress. The full details are in the attached record, attachment 1, which includes management comments. The report for the year ended 30th June was received in December 2024, and there are 17 new recommendations, which will be updated in 2025.
Thanks, Narian. So are there any questions or comments on this? So there's quite a substantial level of movement, Narian. Thank you for that. I'm glad to see that essentially a good number have been dealt with. I know there are 17 coming through the audit report, which is good audit work, but I wonder if there's any questions or comments on the outstanding here. Yes, Michelle?
A quick question for clarity. So on, for example, number 8, the closed landfills, where we've got down the bottom, it's got the Audit New Zealand comments, and then at the very bottom it's got December 24 closed. But is that the auditor's recommendation, or is that your recommendation to this committee? Because I got a bit confused because we're kind of going no progress, closed. There's quite a few examples similar. That was just one I picked out.
For the external auditors' comments, for internal audit, basically I follow up with the respective units and they give their comments, and once the New Zealand audit gives their report, and when they say for that particular issue it's closed, from there then I close and present in this meeting. So without their endorsement, I will not recommend here to close. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment? I think with a lot of those ones is the issue is essentially been dealt with and is now just an operational issue. So audit highlighted issues, which have then essentially been sorted, and then now it just becomes business as usual. Yeah.
Groovy. So, look, I am comfortable, Andrew, that as I say, you guys have moved on a fair bit. That only leaves a small number. We've got high leave annual balances, and we'll have a discussion on that, I think, when we get to health and safety. I think we've got some numbers sitting there. I've always asked auditors, when does this actually come off? Because we'll probably always struggle with high balances, but having said that, that's fine. The annual report preparation, I know we'll come back to that when we talk with the auditor. I mean, we have got ourselves there, but I know, it's clear there's more improvements, so it'll be interesting to talk about that with you. I would have thought that the one that seems to still be open, which is around the CCO information, I would have thought our response said it was closed, which is all available information's up on the website, so it seems to me to be actually closed. There's the water asset revaluation stuff. Again, it looks like you're comfortable with the recommendation, and we'll bring that forward to a new valuation, so I'd argue that it should be closed. Waka Kotahi one, that was an interesting one. It's not an audit one, but it is an external audit through Waka Kotahi. Have we nailed that? I was just trying to work through. It says work is still ongoing in this area, so probably we haven't nailed it. The finance team are working on moving the final few work orders that need moved to the correct NZTA work category, which will ensure complete clear line of sight.
What that issue was is that we have certain work orders, and then NZTA send in their buyer-created tax invoice, and they weren't necessarily aligning with the work order because there was issues with some things going into this work order, some things going into another work order. So it was more administration to make sure that everything was in the right place so that reconciliation could be done a lot simpler.
Mm.
Yeah.
Cool. Does that mean, so we're just doing some retrospective work here on old work orders that we need to reconcile?
Correct.
Okay, as in contrast to going forward?
Yes.
Oh, okay, so it's really it's a legacy issue rather than a
Yes, it
foregone
is.
issue. Okay, that's cool. It always, for various reasons, it's not here, I've had some challenges at some of my councils about actually whether we can put a valid claim to NZTA, and it's all based around obviously the build-up of our own information. So if we can get that one nailed, that's good. Okay, well that's good. Now, Ian, going forward, if you're recommending or noting that it should be closed, could you just put a light shade through the item? Just be honest, particularly when you see A3 sitting in A4, it's quite good to be able to help with your review to know what really counts and what doesn't. Okay, brilliant. Can we move that we receive a note? And well done, team. We're getting down there. There's more coming in, I know, but that's useful. I'll move that. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Michelle. Put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Right. Now we are on internal audit activities. Please, in your hands.
Through you, the Chair, the internal audit activities. The asset management audit has been completed. The final report is included in the internal audit quarterly report in the PX. Employee recruitment and retention strategy review. Final report is included in the internal audit quarterly report in the PX. Legislative compliance integrity framework report by legal service manager is included in the PX. Operational expenditure and policy internal audit. This is to be undertaken in 2025 by external resources. Contract management, as per our last ARC meeting, this will be undertaken by internal resource in January 2025, and the terms of reference and the list of significant contracts is included in the internal audit quarterly report in the PX. And with effect from 9th January 2025, the new global internal audit standards will be effective. So to align with that, the revision of the internal audit charter, the internal audit plan based on the risk-based auditing will be done as per Chair's request. This will be presented in the June ARC meeting. And also moving forward, we'll try to create more awareness in terms of the risk and assurance functions for better collaboration.
Thank you, Narayan. So this is an interim plan to keep you going. make certain productivity occurs. Well, we'll come back to this also in June, as you say. So if I look at it correctly, I wonder if I can just help as I synthesised all this together. If we look at page 62, if I've got this correct, what you're planning to do next year, or yes, this is where we get mixed up between financial years, but let's not get too worried, is the operational expenditure and policy review, the contract management review, the treasury and cash flow management review, the accounts payable controls, the LIM process, and the resource and building consent process. That's what, if I've done the synthesis right, that's the program for 2025, correct? Right? Brilliant. That's a fair swag. It's good. I'd like all power to you to do that, Stephen. Is there any...
what we're aiming for today was just to sense check that with you and see if that... I mean, this was the programme that was set by Deloitte a number of years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
And if it's just still in line with what you think the risks we are facing in the organisation are. As I said, it's very general, broad brush, and it was almost good to get started, but if you'd like us to take a slightly more targeted approach rather than just following through to the end of this list, that might be for the workshop in June if you wanted a proper reset.
It probably is, but look, my personal take is, yes, I agree, let's get on with the stuff, because I can justify all of it, and justify all of it in relationship to Timaru. And part of it, for instance, is things like accounts payable controls. Well, sort of like, okay, yeah, but actually this is about our just normal processes and system. Can we get assurance over it? So I mean, it's a big tick from me that we asked Narayan to do that sort of work, along with some of this other stuff, which, like contract management, is so important. So I don't actually have any trouble with what's proposed here.
Both the accounts payable and the LIM process ones are actually quite prescient for the moment, because we're actually introducing new systems. So we're doing procure to pay through ESCR, and then we've got the new automated LIM tool. So actually pushing them slightly back in the year, but having them after these things have been bedded in a bit better actually show where we've got to with them.
Well, you're giving me 25. You've given us 2025, so that can be quarter four rather than quarter one.
They are still there. When they were set back then, possibly they were just general, but they are actually quite relevant for us at the moment.
Yeah. So, folk, anybody else got? Oh, I just lost Scotty. I think I've still got him. Any other thoughts that you would like to see Narayan working on? Does it match our risks? It feels like it does. Can I just ask one question? And I'm not sort of busting my boiler on this one, Narayan. But I'd like you and Andrew to think this one through, please. One of the clear themes in the sector from the Auditor General is the equal importance they correctly, and I'm supporting this, place on our systems of control and evidence for our non-financial performance. And it's, whether it's road smoothness, whether it's compliance with our water standards, etc., there is an equal weight being given to having appropriate systems, processes and controls around the build-up of that information. I'll keep going for a moment, Stephen. And actually it's important that we gain some level of assurance that they are producing right information. And actually it provides, and I'm not saying anything about Timaru, but I am making some observations from elsewhere, Narayan. Some of these require cross-departmental cooperation, which isn't always willingly given. And I raise the smoothness one because that requires engineers to talk to accountants, and that is not always a given. I'm assuming it is here in Timaru. But I just want to reflect that actually some of the issues I have seen for us to be accountable to the public because internally some of our departments can't talk with each other. And I stress, I'm not saying that's the case here in Timaru, and that's not the object of the review, but it's just reflecting we need to get this right to remove some of the noise. But actually, if we're focused on levels of service, which we should be as good governors, we want to know the stuff that comes in front of us is reliable. Stephen.
So Our strategic and policy advisor is doing a bit of programme of work in how to use the Opal. We've got an Opal 3 tool, which measures all our non-financial councillors get reported to every quarter. She's putting slightly more strict rules and processes around that at the moment to get the data going into the system a lot better, to provide that higher level of assurance and to make it easier when we come round to annual report time, because at the end of the day it's just an extract from there that we fill that whole front of the book with. So that's a work in progress, but should provide a bit more richer detail coming out of that system than at the moment. Road smoothness is always a hard one, but the
well, hold it. It's road smoothness this year. Okay, it'll be, and we've had trouble with trying to work through, flooding, dry weather events with flooding and what constitutes dry weather, etc., etc. So I mean, all I'm trying to reflect here, Stephen, is my generalisation.
Yeah,
that our systems of evidence gathering and reporting for non-financial information is as important as the financial.
We had the tool, but it was our advisor's opinion that it wasn't being used to its full functionality, so she's working through that at the moment to get it singing.
Okay,
so you could actually, on some of these, incorporate those non-financials into some of these, like resource building consent process. You could actually, while it's focused on the billing of resources on the consents, you could actually just extend that to look at the timing of them completed and the system for recording it. Because they do go hand in hand.
Yeah, love the idea, Nigel. I think that makes a lot of sense. So if as I said, look, I've raised it that way. If I could just, Marianne, as we go through to June, think that one through, that would be really superb as to whether we should devote some of your time or get some resource to devote time on that one. That would be good. Outside of the meeting, I can indicate to you a couple of councils you could talk to, not too far away from here, that are focusing a wee bit of their internal audit resource around some of this. So I'm not being particularly original in raising that. Okay, that's cool. Thank you. That's got the program at this stage. So if we go to the recommendation is that we receive the update, we confirm the upcoming areas for internal audit, which I think we're doing, and we provide guidance on audit priorities, and we've given you a sense of that both in terms of a 3-year plan in June and one or two other matters which are sitting there. I'll move in a seconder for this, please. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Scotty. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. Brilliant. Rightio. Risk management quarterly update. Marianne, thank you.
Through the chair, risk management quarterly report. There are 12 strategic risks. 1 is very high, 7 high, 3 medium, and 1 with low rating. There is 1 change for risk personnel. Inability to attract and retain a skilled and competent workforce is now rated as low risk from the initial high risk, as the staff turnover as at August 2024 was 2.81%, and the vacancies as at 10/2024 was only 7. This was confirmed by the recruitment audit that was undertaken. So this change in rating to be accepted from the high to low risk. And as earlier alluded, all risks currently is in ProMap have been transferred over to the Flowingly software, and training for which will progress in early 2025. This will improve both reporting and management of the risk and enable both the strategic risks and underlying corporate risks to be managed more dynamically by the risk holder. As per risk and assurance unit, the risk comes under second line of defense, and audit and risk will trying to be focusing on the strategic risk, and also in terms of corporate risks, the risk ownership lies with the GMs of the respective units, and in terms of the mitigation plans, that will be verified by the audit and risk unit to ensure that the right mitigations are working, and if the risk rating needs to be changed. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. So we've agreed, just out of interest, perhaps in June we'll do a bit of a refresh around these. Having said that, it's more to relate them to our objectives. None of the strategic risks, by the way, that we have here are ones that I think would particularly move off. So it's not as if I'm suggesting a radical change, by the way, going forward, but I do actually think that's important. The other thing we've just discussed is actually looking at your work program and the way you've raised the questions. Is our internal audit work program driving to give us assurance over particularly the controls we have in place, and that should be related to the big risks. So there's a bit of a check that you've sponsored in the argument, Stephen, here, which is really useful. You got some comments?
I think January is one of those good months in which everyone can come back and take a fresh look at what they're doing.
Yeah.
And if we've got the start of the new software in place there as well, it's part of that. Again, we'll refresh all this stuff. Some of the strategic risks are so large that almost they're seen as slightly abstract, sort of like climate change and things like that. But to be honest, they do affect a massive number of our systems, services, and sort of public expectations of things. So they probably will sit there. But I think there needs to be a little bit more detail and nuance in them as well.
Well, what I actually reflected on, Stephen, and it's a bit remiss of me, is that I think actually one thing we need to add to our meetings, dare I say it, I'd try and find ways to take other things off we had to, is we should be taking each of these risks, talking with the risk owner and doing a deep dive. That's one thing that we're not doing at this stage. Now, I'm relaxed because we needed to get to this point and we've got good reporting. That's really useful, but we're going to do something broad brush here now in the space of 5 minutes. We need to probably help focus around these key risks and agree, something like climate change, it's big and amorphous. You need a wee bit of support from us as to where this is, to how to drive and deal with it. Look, overall, if I look at page 74, we're saying that that generally the risk profile has stayed pretty much the same. With only the climate change obviously being outside risk along with, one other, while we're also saying the personnel one here hasn't caught up with some of the other comments elsewhere, that actually we think personnel risk is low now with some stability and resourcing. Is that true? Our risk profile is the same as last time? It's not getting riskier or it's getting better? We get a strong sense of that. You might have a comment on that one, Nigel, but your first, Steve.
I mean, we've been bashing this around the SLT a lot, and a lot of the focus has actually been on that risk appetite line that runs down the middle of the graph, because the argument is, despite some of our best efforts, if some of those risks happen, the events will be catastrophic.
Yep.
So you're never going to get everything below that black line. So as part of the July meeting or the July workshop, it might be good to actually
the risk appetite. Agree entirely. Yep.
A realistic risk appetite is based on the sort of risks we do, because as a council's naturally high risk, and it's not to say we're not taking them seriously, but I think it says a lot more honesty in reporting if we do have a line that's set probably better reflecting what we do.
Yep.
I think SLT debate these quite regularly.
Good.
And there are a number of the inherent risk assessments that we wonder whether they're far too high on here. And if they were brought down, then your residual risk will drop,
Yeah.
And you read some of them and you go, really? Would that really be severe? And is that almost certain? Some of these I would doubt. So that process needs to happen again.
Yeah, I think we had a debate, Nigel, at the last meeting, or perhaps I made the comment, health and safety, when it does happen, it is always major, if not severe. The question is in terms of likelihood and impact. So the impact is always bad. The question is, can we reduce the likelihood? But that's the sort of discussion I'd like to have inside a so-called deep dive session with the owner, with Roo or the team over that, because that's actually what we should be aiming for. What I sense, Stephen, and I reflected this again yesterday, a lot of these risks are driven by externalities to Timaru, and in some sense we're a taker rather than being able to actually determine everything. So I'm comfortable with that. And in lots of ways I talk about our risk profile. I'm really saying, given that there are strategic risks, is the environment out there making it more difficult for us to do business, or is it getting better? So we can argue stable staff, which is probably as much in our hands, is actually working in our favour at the moment, which is great news. But actually, what about some of the other things that are sitting outside, you know? And some, we're still in this current reform process. I mean, if we, quite frankly, I mean, I know it's topical, but if we get benchmarking on us tomorrow, we're going to have to become expert at actually how the benchmarks work. But it creates also a risk, particularly, Nigel, when it comes to planning. Now, we might say, well, we're not scared about that, but the reality of it is, you know, it's going to change the community expectation and the risk profile that exists for us, and that's an externality. The question is, how do we react? Okay, any other thoughts or comments from folk? Yes, Michelle?
I didn't understand some of the ratings, but if we're going to do a workshop and do a deep dive, I don't really expect answers today, but it would be good for us to understand, for example, why our flood management plan is ineffective, and how you think that having iwi engagement on our committees is effective when they never show up. So I'm kind of, it would be good to understand how some of those things...
We've got time to ask some of those questions, because I'm pretty certain I asked about floodplain management last time.
Yeah.
It's still ineffective, but I mean, we have got some time now, Michelle, so ask your question.
Probably more those ineffective ones. Why are they ineffective, and do we have a plan? Like, do we own that floodplain management plan, or is that the ECAM one it's referring to? And if it's ineffective, do we have a plan to review it and make it more effective? Or do we just go, that's ineffective, and move on?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the floodplain management one is owned by ECAM, but it's our response to that in terms of how we respond to that information that became available in the last sort of 12, 18 months. So yeah, we do need a plan, and that presumably needs to go into a work program and happen, but and that will then shift the dial in terms of where it appears on the risk map.
So,
A couple of others, like the what one said under the forward planning of organisational work streams, but maybe that's going to be a little bit solved by flowingly. And the other ineffective one is, and probably the same answer to the floodplain, is the HPL, highly productive land use control.
Well, I think it's like,
Are the key ones.
it's like Mr. Chair pointed out, it's an externality imposing policy on us that has a significant effect on how we create a district plan that's going to give effect to how we use land. So that, at the moment, is in flux a little bit, with the original policy statement being put on hold for another year and a half. And so we may have an opportunity, for example, to help ECAN with their mapping, because what they've done to date will be quite detrimental to our aspirational growth plans, for example, and our FDAs. So we do have an opportunity, now that that's on hold, to step into that process and start trying to work in a meaningful way with them around what they're using as criteria to justify the land, the productivity class of the land. But I think it's a national problem, it's not just a Timaru problem.
I actually think that a workshop is required, because when I look at a number of these, and as I said earlier, you start with the inherent risk. Your inherent risk drives the whole thing. And when you look at it and you go that, you know, we believe that inability to attract and retain staff is severe and almost certain. Well, if it's almost certain, it may not be severe, because there are other workarounds. And those are the sorts of things I look at this and go, really? The breakdown relationship with iwi, severe and almost certain. Well, is it almost certain? You'd have to question that. There's a number of these like this, and you go, you know, the inadequate funding for a rise in vertical infrastructure, severe and almost certain. Well, really? You know, we're well within our debt levels, and you just stand back and you go, all of this needs a rethink. And then that drives your residual risk through the obviously the controls.
That's an interesting point. So we're agreeing we need to look at this in more detail. We need to have some time to be able to deal with because I mean, Michelle did it slightly differently, but still in a very similar way, because I'm taking this as being current. I'm glad to hear SLT. I think you used the word, you're bashing SLT with this, Stephen. If that's, I hope your colleagues feel that way. That's good if you are. But when I start looking at what technically is either red or pink here, I start to say these are some big driving things inside this organisation. Actually, when I add them all together, I start to say I would be very keen to see a program to fix these. Because if they are truly red or pink, we're missing an action in some area around the management of these strategic risks. And again, it comes back to the fact if they are strategic risks, it would dictate that we would put some resource to it. Now, I don't think this is up to date, okay? Because I mean, I see here things like reductions in level of service and revised capital works programs under the funding is not developed. Well, you must have done that in terms of your last LTP, right? I mean, this can't be up to date, or if it is up to date, you've got real problems going forward with our in the current year, which we haven't addressed. But all I'm trying to reflect here is probably your point, Nigel. This does make the place look more risky than it might actually be.
I think what's missing is the process to actually review and change them, because even in the DHB, I found it even as a CE, more or less impossible to change them. I'd go to the audit risk people, I'd say, we need to review this and change it, and no, sorry. And it was, so we just need a process of, SLT may have a view on this, where does that view go to, because they're strategic?
Oh, it comes here.
Yeah, and they need to come here, and that's quarterly, so we need to start doing that, rather than regurgitating the same report every quarter.
I'm conscious that these risks are actually quite dynamic. I'm not saying that the arrow being horizontal is incorrect, but it does change. They are dynamic relative to what we can do in terms of response. What I'm looking for here in the first instance is this sounds negative, but I'll put it this way. I need leadership out of SLT. Where are we going on these strategic risks? Because from my perspective, these are the key things that will stop us from achieving our LTP. Okay, and if we haven't got resource to dealing with the reds and pinks, the slight hard question has got to be from this committee, why not? So we can think about that. That would be really helpful. I think you and I are quite aligned there, Nigel. So, and Stephen, I think we are as well. But if we could reflect on that, and again, it also reflects that the committee needs to do a bit more hard work with you guys on an ongoing basis around each of these risks.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, the tools we have aren't particularly set up for live changing and reporting. As Nigel said, it's almost, physically, it's almost impossible to go in and change those things. And I would say that when they were originally set, there was I wouldn't say a bias, but there was an urge to fully reflect the seriousness of the situation, which probably led to slight over-reporting there.
Yeah.
But as I said, it's good for all the new systems coming in to actually sit down and reset everything as we go through as well.
Brilliant. Good. So look, the other thing which I'm wanting my cake and eating it too, to be honest. So one of the other things, Naren, that I'd be keen to see and hear is also what I would call our emerging risk, and that's actually probably some of the changing nature of the external dynamics. To be honest, by chance, I had an informal catch-up with Nigel, just before the meeting. And so, I mean, some of the emerging risks are, what's our response to development of audit delivery service? And indeed, the whole, where's that? Because that's a strategic issue for us, which Naren, I'd be expecting there to be a level of commentary for us at this sort of meeting and potentially a debate. I mean, I didn't do it facetiously, but I do raise some of the changes around expectations of accountability and drive in terms of expectations from the DIA on us, or the Minister, on us as a council. And there's a bunch of other things that are going on, and I'm just wondering, well, let me just ask the question, where are we at with water? Nigel, can I ask that? Because it's a strategic
So-
challenge for us and it's going to be a big time burner, if not
So
already.
we've got a project team, and there's got a sponsor. We've created a steering committee, which has got a number of councillors on that. We've worked through two options, quite a long way into those, being in-house or a standalone CCO. We are trying very hard to work, or to actually get other councils to work with us, and that is quite challenging.
Yeah.
In that, and I think it's challenging from the side of what's left. When you take water out of a council, what's left? And I think that's more the challenging part.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's the same for us. If we decide to take water out of here into a CCO, there is a lot of stranded overheads that are really hard to think about. So that's the part that's unseen.
Agreed.
And if I could show you the documents that we've got, they're pretty robust and they're pretty mature so far. And I think the team's doing a fantastic job on it. Council have also been briefed. Council has a view that they will look at all three options, being in-house, standalone CCO or a joint CCO. So that's where we're at the moment. It's showing that we're sustainable and that we're well within the limits from a financial point of view.
For the first two options.
For the first 10 years.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. And how's that influencing what's that impact on the organisation, Nigel? I mean, I said before, perhaps with a level of ignorance, if not arrogance, that don't do your annual report till October. Because
We're managing it well, and we've got a bit of a mantra that if it does go to a CCO, it's a lift and shift, because effectively a standalone is the staff we've got, the majority of the staff are going to be required, because and a lot of those people are actually scarce resources in terms of nationally. So we're keeping the staff well informed, keeping them up to date, and getting them into the process and the buy-in.
Brilliant. Okay, that's good. Anything else?
It's not to say there are not a number of questions still to be answered. So there's, the three or four big questions are assets. Which assets, do the assets go across or do they stay?
Yep.
Stormwater, in or out?
Yep.
The financing, it'd be through LGFA, and that's got a 0.5 margin on top of what councils pay. So what does that do to ours?
Yes.
To our cost structures? So they're the bigger questions that are going to be answered.
Yeah. It would strike me the third option will be difficult to land in time for consultation, correct?
Is proving to be challenging.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not trying to be smart or facetious, but I'm just thinking about the time it takes to develop an effective option analysis for consultation with the community.
I think it's actually, depending on where the councils you're working with is sitting. So there's one council that didn't do an LTP, so they're actually trying to get that out at the same time.
Yes.
And that gives them their 10-year view. There are other councils that are actually doing their own analysis, and that's showing up answers they probably didn't expect.
I agree. Okay, so we'll talk about time. Okay, look, that's brilliant. Anything else folk would like to raise at this stage about big picture where council's at in terms of sort of the concept of the risk framework we're in? We're okay?
Sorry, just a question for Nige T. Through you, Mr Chair. They have actually shared their information now, those councils, with us?
Yep, so we've employed Michael Bora to pull our numbers together, and they have now shared those with Michael to try and get a little bit of independence, and then we approached a consultancy firm to actually assist, to work with Michael to pull those together. But trying to get that firm to keep it narrow is proving a challenge in itself. So the idea is to pull them together, have a workshop in the new year with those councils to say, here's what it looked like, what have we missed, or what have we duplicated?
And I reflect, and I have to be careful because there's probably only too few examples, but one where the aim a bit north, which is a joint water company, is taking a lot of coordination, as far as I can observe as an external. Just exactly the point you're making. Just get the same financials on the same base with the same thinking, and then crunching them together is difficult. Elsewhere, I know of where a major metro is going down the CCO route, but then actually, if you want to suddenly graft people in, the level of work that it takes in coordination is actually quite high. So we're running out of runway. Is really what the message is here. In terms of being too advanced in our thinking, which creates that challenge to be optioned.
And the other big challenge is, there's one set of numbers that I've seen that I would suggest are unconstrained numbers.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And actually getting people to be mature enough to say, actually, we are constrained.
Yep.
What does that constrained view look like?
Yes, a good point. Yes, that's come across my desk in the last couple of weeks as well. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, well, look, that's fine. I think we'll keep a little watch on that. But again, this comes back to the fact that actually our risk environment is not stable. Is that the right? It's changing. It's dynamic. It's rather than unstable. It's actually dynamic. We need to be aware of that as we go forward. Okay, that's great. Okay, can we just move then, please, to the motion, which is to receive and note Narayan's report. I'll move it. I've got a seconder, please. Thank you, Nigel. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, it's carried. How are we going for time, guys? Oh, do folk need a break, or shall we just see it? They're here? Okay, why don't we deal with them, because, as I said, we'll deal in open with the management report. I'll then propose that we go into PX. I'll adjourn so that we can just have our time with the auditors and then reconvene. But I suspect at that stage we'll be ready for a cup of tea and you guys will have a slightly longer break. Is that okay? You handle that? Nobody's got a problem with that? Brilliant. If we could get Rudy and Jenna on board, that would be wonderful, please. Take it you guys will want to speak to your report first before I invite Rudy to speak to it. Yes?
We
yes?
can.
No? Okay, have we got Rudy and Jenna there?
So from our point of view, the Audit New Zealand issued an unmodified opinion on the 31st of October, which allowed us to get the annual report signed off in time. First time in a couple of years, I think. It was a really good learning process for us, as we had an entirely different audit team, and we had a team at our side doing it as well. So a lot of the issues that have been brought up through the process have been quite useful for us, and we think we'll be in a reasonably good state for going ahead for next year.
Yeah, so similar comments to Stephen, with essentially with the 31st of October deadline, new teams, new staff. We pushed as much as we could, hence the number of items that are on here are items that we're currently working on now in preparation for the 24-25 annual report. We have also had our senior finance business partner has departed. An offer has gone out to a new person who is an ex-auditor. There's
a few of us around.
So has had some council audit experience as well. So hoping once they're on board that they'll be able to also provide additional guidance to us to get this process a lot smoother.
Brilliant. So we have got them all. G'day Rudy, g'day Jenna, how are you? Can you hear us okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Oh, brilliant, well done. So, sorry, just as you were coming on board, Rudy and Jenna, I think I was hearing from Stephen and Andrea the recognition of the position we were in this year, recognition that there's a good number, 17 if I got my numbers right, recommendations And one's effectively you're indicating you're committed to dealing with, and I guess the corollary is ensuring they don't cause the hiccups, if I can call it that actually they are, and the reasons why you need to raise that today. So really, look, I think with that, if you guys are okay, perhaps there's some broad comments you'd like to make, or comments you'd like to make on your finalised management report, and then I'll open for discussion with the committee. In your hands.
Thanks, Bruce. How long do I have?
Well, look, we don't need to, I think, well, how long do you need? Because, by the way, after this, we'll go into PX and have the other session with you. But how long do you need, mate? It's a reasonably readable report. If we can keep it at a higher level, that would be good. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, probably about 15 minutes, Bruce. If
50.
It's okay with, I'd just like to make some introductory remarks, then I'll talk to the report, and then some concluding remarks, and then I'll take some questions, if that's okay.
Yep, if you can make it, did you say 1.5? If you can make it 10, that would be better. Thank you.
Okay. So I just want to reiterate that, this was a challenging audit. Both Jenna and myself were new, and I think in some instances it made it better because, you had fresh pairs of eyes actually looking at things. I can't stress strongly enough the constructive attitude that the audit was conducted in. Having that relationship with Nigel and Andrea and the team simply facilitated the audit process. There are some councils who still have not been able to sign the audit opinions where the relationship between the auditor and the entity is quite acrimonious. So, as we mentioned before, we managed to meet all the statutory deadlines, so the annual report, the summary report, and the debenture trustee audit, and that could not have been possible without having that relationship. I think we also, as I mentioned, when we adopted, we did a lot of work as part of the 24J audit that will set us up for a good start in 2025. When I look at the actual management letter, I'll take the document as read. There's a couple of pages where I just want to make some comments. On page 88, I think the most important point probably is the reference to the unmodified audit opinion. The emphasis of matter we've traversed well. I think earlier in the week you had a session with TDHL. It is important that TDHL stay close to, I guess, both their significant investments, the Prime Port and Alpine Energy. So, anything that comes from that, whether it's a decision by the Commerce Commission, financial impact of that, etc., is known well in advance. On page 89, the new recommendations that I would like to just focus on is there are three control-related ones. So when it comes to internal control, those are normally the ones where a fraud risk is posed. So internal control is very important when we look at the prevention of fraud. So delegations register information not matching. So, everyone will know that having appropriate delegations in place just reinforces that financial discipline. So that is important. Separation of duties risk. So having people not performing incompatible functions. That is another key control when it comes to the appropriate use of finances. And then the review of manual journals. So the journal entry is a key way where, if you are that way inclined, you can actually manipulate results. So having a robust control process around not so much automated journals, so those are the journals that that gets processed and reversed automatically, but the manual ones, the one-off ones, is very important. On that control related issue, I can just point to our specific findings where we talk about the risk of management override of internal control on page 96. So although we've had these three findings, I just want to stress that we found no indications of management override that would result in a material misstatement in the financial statements due to fraud. So yes, we did identify some areas where internal control can be improved, but overall we are very satisfied with the integrity of management. Just back to page 91, we talk about the assessment of the year-end work in progress balance. So at 30 June 24, I think the balance was about $49 million. Work in progress comprises, I guess, various contracts, mainly in the infrastructure asset sphere. It is a big balance. It is important for that balance to be assessed on a regular basis to make sure that A, you're only capitalising costs that you should be capitalising, and B, that all the projects included in the work in progress balance actually represent valid contracts still ongoing. So if a contract is stopped for any reason, or there are costs in there where a project has already been implemented, it may indicate that your work in progress is overvalued. So that is an important matter that has to be dealt with for the next financial year. The consolidation process, again on page 91, it's something of a strange one. It's a fairly uncomplicated consolidation. So it's basically council and one significant component, which is TDHL. But it's just a question of getting some structure around how that consolidation model is prepared and given to audit so that it's easy for us to actually identify what the sort of standing journals are, what the eliminations are, and just make that whole process a bit more streamlined. The last thing on page 91 is just the old hairy chestnut of sensitive expenditure. So council have policies in place that deals with sensitive expenditure. It is something as the auditors that the OAG requires us to look at. So just making sure that the housekeeping for that is actually in place. On page 92, just status of previous recommendations. So we started off with 17 open items. 11 of those were closed, which is, I think, a very good result, and 6 of them remain open. Just moving to page 96. So we've spoken about the risk of management override of internal controls. The next item is valuation of infrastructure assets. I think there was a bit of time wasted at the beginning of the year just trying to get to grips with the assets that have been identified for valuation and the frequency of those valuations. So it is important that council decide earlier on which categories of assets are going to be revalued and which are not. So the ones that are not will be subject to fair value assessments. But getting that view done early, so doing your fair value assessments, see how your unit rates have moved and whether or not it's likely a valuation may be required out of sequence. That is important because you have to engage your valuers, you have to go through a proper process and review the end result. And it's obviously a an area where, as auditors, we do spend a lot of time on. Just again on the valuations, page 100, which is basically a requirement we're putting on councils now to develop a database of their own unit rate information. So unit rates differ from region to region, validly so. We have a sort of a national database that we are compiling using the valuation results of councils we audit, but it still is important for a council to have its own rate information available, because you have to challenge, I guess, what the valuer comes up with. And we have found instances where valuers adjust rates to reflect other valuations that they've done, not necessarily in the region, and you do end up with unit rates that are not reflective of the rates the council is achieving in its contracts. So a very important matter to consider and to make sure is in place when you do decide to do a revaluation. Just in conclusion, I'd like to make a couple of comments. There's always room for improvement. So there's a couple of things that Audit New Zealand is doing to make sure that the audit process goes smoother. The first thing is we are transitioning Timaru for the 25J audit to our new cloud-based auditing system. It's called Veneer. It takes quite a big involvement from us in the first year, but then because it's cloud-based and it allows you to roll forward certain things, subsequent years there should be quite a bit of saving. A key requirement though is your GL structure needs to remain stable. So currently we have a trial balance. We've mapped that to Veneer. We have done a trial run, and I think we're in a position where we actually have a set of financial statements that balances with the 2024 audited financial statements. But once council decides to make changes to the general ledger structure, the codes, that presents us with a bit of a problem. So any changes in that sphere needs to be communicated. Also, we are employing an artificial intelligence or AI tool that's going to assist us with checking financial statements. A significant cost that we have every year is where we have multiple sets of financial statements. They have to be manually checked at this point. So there are tools out there being used by some of the bigger audit firms that we are going to invest in. I guess the other thing from our perspective is the audit plan for the 25J audit will be with council at least 3 months before the year end, so much earlier than last year, and that will give council quite a good idea of what we're going to be focused on. If I think of audit improvements that council can make, there are a couple of things. Obviously, the first one would be to address the management data points. So, there's a number of outstanding ones. Nigel and I have discussed, I think it's very important that council takes a project approach to developing the annual report. So the annual report set out the disclosures, the comparatives, that can all be done way before year end. And it's important that, one recognises the annual report has got various components. It's got a financial component, a non-financial component, and those components are equally important. So it's vital that there may be a project lead, but the appropriate level of experience actually looks after the finance side and similarly the performance reporting side. They require different skills. So it's not to say that Andrea is necessarily the most appropriate individual to also look after performance reporting. I'm not saying that's not the way it should be, but that should definitely be considered. Also, consider if you are going to do valuations that you can do the valuations earlier than 30 June. So I think we've got a window of about 3 months, which means that council can do a valuation at 31 March or April or May and still have that result incorporated into the 30 June financial statements. It does just take a bit of pressure off what can sometimes become a high pressure year end. And I guess the last thing is just some of these comments that we make in the management letter go back to basics. So whether it's reconciliations or whether it's one-up approvals or something in that vein, I guess just get to a state where you do the basics right. That should definitely streamline the process. Bruce, that's all I've got to say. Happy to take questions from the committee.
Thank you, Rudy. Appreciate that, and appreciate the balanced comments you've given us, both positive and also areas for improvement. Jenna, it would be rude of me not to give you a chance to say anything. Are you okay? Not that you want to counter what Rudy said, but is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think Rudy's covered off everything.
Good. That's a good career-enhancing comment, I'd suspect, Jenna. So well done. No, thank you for that. I always appreciate a manager's view because I know that in lots of ways you do very much the hard yards with the file, which is superb. Okay, that's great. So look, folk, do we have any questions here for Rudy or Jenna, or indeed staff in relationship to the report? We've had a pretty fulsome briefing, which I do appreciate, and you've read it. Is there any comments folk would like to make? Well, look, I don't think we need to dwell too much more. It's reasonably clear. Andrea, I think the critical thing that I would say here is I've looked at the 17 recommendations. Obviously, we've done a good number of them. They're reasonably... it's easy for me to sit back and say, gee whiz, well, look, we must be able to clean these up. But actually, I think the critical thing must be that in terms of, and I know we do have a project approach, but perhaps having a chance to reassess that, these are the sorts of things that we would be looking to see don't get repeated next year. Right, I know that's your objective, but I think I need to say that because actually they should be reasonably easy things to clean up, correct? Yeah, brilliant. That's good.
So through you, Mr. Chair, look, that was a really balanced report from Rudy, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I can also vouch that some of those recommendations have already been completed.
Yeah, so no, I appreciate that too, Nigel, yeah. Yeah, no, look, I do, and I am appreciative of what appears to be, Nigel, a good working relationship between, I'm about to say both sides. Well, it's actually wrong to say both sides now. It sounds like a joint operation, albeit I don't doubt Rudy's independence in terms of making points made. I have been very interested, Rudy, in the comments around fair valuation of assets, both the actual need to revalue, but actually also the fair value assessment, and your comments on page 100 and 101. This has been an area that actually, and I'm probably only expressing a personal journey here, is where there has been substantial move in the need to meet the standards that are required. And I think there are two things there that I would go back to that I have taken on board and I just share with the rest of the committee. This is the second report I've seen where the suggestion is, and I think you even said it was an Audit New Zealand requirement to have a unit rate database. And I can tell you at the last one I said, oh, is this a new requirement? The answer was yes. Look, it's hard to argue against that. I mean, essentially the issue is to have evidence about the rates that we use. But I think a point which I'm reflecting on from working within the sector is indeed what really becomes, I think, the critical test, that the rates we use are, and it's under that last paragraph, reflective of the sustainable market conditions. Also that if you go back, that they're normalised, and if they're internal, we take on board indirect costs. So I think this is an area that actually, shall we say strategically, if I can put it this way, in terms of how we report and its impact on our balance sheet, this is an area that probably I will certainly in the coming year, but I'd be asking we have a level of focus on. You're looking at me quizzically there, Nigel. You're welcome to make a comment if you wish.
I was just reflecting on how you do this, and probably your two biggest areas is water and roading, and we're going to have to, finance is going to have to link with those departments because they're the ones with that information.
Absolutely, yeah.
And also, you're quite right, it has to be, we've got to be careful that we're doing it in a sustainable environment, because we are enjoying some rates at the moment that I just wonder about.
Yeah. And look, and I mean, because it was public, I mean, in Wellington this year, where 3 councils used the same value or same exercise, because it also related to 3 Waters reform, you know, the rates that came up for Wellington were quite different to the rest of the country, and there needed to be a significant debate about why that was met the sustainable market conditions relative to the rest of the country. So I think that to me is probably, looking at this report, the big learning for me out of this one. So I would just take that one on board. In terms of the actual individual recommendations, Andrea, none of these, I mean, I'd look at one or two and look like, well, we might or we might not do the recommendation, particularly around the relifing of assets which have been depreciated down, etc. One or two of those things, but there's nothing here that particularly you want to comment on. We're essentially going to deal with this all, aren't we? Great. Okay. Sweet.
Our group, our GM for infrastructure, he has a firm belief that the life of the assets is longer than what we're utilising at the moment. So it'll be interesting to go through that process with him to see what that brings up.
Yeah, yes, that would be. Okay, well, look, with that, can we move then? I sense we should keep ourselves moving on. Sorry, Michelle.
Can I just ask a question? I just wonder if we can give Andrea and the team an opportunity to help us understand some of the misstatements, because when you look at some, especially some of the bigger ones around the derivatives and the cash at bank, it's very easy to go, that's accounting 101, how did we get that wrong? But I'm sure there is a valid explanation that I'd love to hear.
Which ones in particular?
So there's one on page 121 around the derivatives, and there's one on page 122 around the cash at the bank.
So the derivative ones was essentially just moving it from a current liability down to non-current liability. The cash at the bank issue is where we had our, we have a Westpac account and we have an ANZ account, and they were both sitting in the same general ledger account as opposed to being separate general ledger accounts. And they were also not feeding up into the current cash balance because of where that particular general ledger code was sitting.
So, and I see that's one of the recommendations, to separate out the GL account so that we can be assured that won't happen again.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I would see a lot of those as actually, I don't want to, it sounds like I'm now being negative, but these are quality control questions. They are getting your draft out in sufficient time. You can then think through, A, have we got the adjustments we need, and B, have we actually thought through, I mean, current liabilities versus long-term liabilities. Okay, broadly speaking, it doesn't change our liability balance, but it's actually relevant for us to know where they sit. And I hate to say it, but I've obviously got to be in my bonnet about benchmarking. going forward, it'll become critical for us. So,
Correct,
it's
we
just-
ran
it's-
out of time this year.
Yeah, I understand that. So again, it just relates to that. And actually, that's a very helpful thing. That was the other thing I've been learning in the last week is actually the idea that we get our fair value assessments done, we do our revaluations if we have to, or any that are scheduled for 31 March. Seems like a hell of a good idea to me.
Yeah, so in regards to, we have already reached out in regards to roading revaluation, so that process has started.
Great,
Yes.
great. Okay, no, that's good.
Bruce, if I can just make a comment.
Yep.
So the Appendix 2 corrected misstatements, they're not necessarily all errors. They sort of capture journal entries that have gone through after we received the first set of financial statements. So something like the derivative one, for instance, wouldn't be an error. That's just the valuation of the derivatives which hadn't been processed by the time we got the first set of financials. For instance, so it's a journal that we go through every year, but it's recorded here because it's something that came after the fact, type thing.
Okay. Oh, that's really helpful. Oh, that's good news. Good news in one sense. Okay, but it just goes back to your point about time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Nigel, I think, were you going to make a comment? Sorry?
I think what's happened in this case is that Andrea, CFO, has done a lot of this work herself, and I think we've got to make sure Andrea's got the resource under her that she can stay above it to actually be that set of eyes that does that review. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that would be reinforced with the project management, with the project approach that Rudy's asking us to reacquaint ourselves. Okay, that's really useful. And now we've got Stacey.
So could I just ask a question sort of around clarification too? Page 107.6.5. I suppose I was a little concerned to see that our revenue wasn't being allocated into the correct areas, which seemed quite significant, 2.2 million. And I just wondered what impact that has as a councillor when we're doing those reviews. Do we actually understand our fees and charges? And that seems quite a big piece of miscommunication.
So what happened in that scenario, there were, they do a sample, and then out of that sample there were a couple of items that were classified in the wrong area, whether it was fees and charges versus other revenue. And then what the audit do is they say, well, okay, of our sample size, this is a value that was incorrect. What would that look like if we did a larger sample? So that's where the $2.2 million comes from. So part of the revenue review will be making sure that things are, when the invoice is generated, that it is actually going to the correct fees and charges versus other revenue lines within the general ledger.
That's a piece of work that we're doing next year as council, reviewing our fees and charges, so it's important we actually understand what's included.
Correct.
Thanks, Stacey. Appreciate that. Any other questions or comments from folk? No? Well, let's go to the recommendation then, if we can, please. Thank you for that. It's been a very helpful discussion, and again, I go back to your point, Nigel, the very balanced set of views from our audit team, if I can put that as small praise, but actually a very balanced response from the office as well. So it's all good, all going round. So the recommendations we receive, and we note the recommendations identified by Audit New Zealand are added to the External Auditor's open recommendations to be reported against at our next committee meeting, recognising already the work that has been done to address the existing ones. I think the key thing is that we get a sense that we've got a project approach, and we're rethinking through our timings in terms of some of the big picture stuff and the core information, which is really the key messages that's come out of here. I'm prepared to move this, please. Thank you, Scotty. Thank you, Nigel. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. If you just bear with us, Rudy, we just need to do a wee bit of work just to get ourselves into PX so that we can then have a short chance to chat to you. On page 130, 31 and over, we have the proposal to move into PX, and I think they're all relevant. So for the reasons stated, I'm going to move that we go into PX. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Nigel. Is there any discussion on the motion? We're all comfortable? Okay, in that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Okay, so once we